Do you believe in the perfectibility of mankind, the ability of people to make the right choices, do good, and make things better? If you do, I'm sorry to say it, but you may be a heretic. Hello, my name is Xander King, and I'm a senior theology major at Loyola University Chicago. Stick around if you want to learn about the unique and mysterious Pelagian controversy which shook the early church, and learn how our modern world continues to interact with Pelagius in more ways than you'd expect. I also do apologize. I've been sick the last couple of days, so if I sound a little bit like the teacher from Charlie Brown, I do apologize. But back to it. Infighting and controversy has always existed in the Western Church. From Joel Osteen to Joseph Smith to Martin Luther, within the last 400 years, the Church has been racked by separations, wars, and judgment. Passed over oftentimes in our pews is the story of how the Church has been fighting since its inception. One of the most interesting fights, which gets passed up even more in the pews, is the theological battle between Augustine and Jerome against Pelagius, and the movement of Pelagianism more broadly. The Pelagian controversy is described as the first theological controversy to take place within the Western Church, and solidified the Augustinian doctrines of original sin and man's total reliance on God's grace for salvation. The consequence of the Pope and Emperor siding with Augustine was the labeling of Pelagius as a heretic and the subsequent destruction and fading away of his work as a theologian. Despite the massive consequences the Pelagian controversy had on the outcome of Western Christianity, as human beings were for centuries defined predominantly in terms of their sinfulness, history has only managed to capture one angle of the argument, leaving Pelagius as a shadowy figure throughout most of history. Recently, however, Pelagius has begun to be reimagined as a much more sympathetic figure who might actually have more in common with the modern church than Augustine or Jerome. Many academics and even pop culture movies have presented Pelagius in a very positive light, begging some questions about how we moderns interact with past heretics. How does a heretic like Pelagius, who battled against one of the largest pillars of Western Christianity, Augustine, become portrayed as a hero to us modern Christians? Pelagius himself only has a handful of works that most people agree upon are his. Additionally, most of his writings are presented in the works of his critics, Augustine and Jerome. In the absence of Pelagius's complete works, is the Pelagius we've constructed even close to the real man whose works were targeted by the Church? And is it really possible to construct the full and correct theology of someone out of criticisms? We will start exploring these questions by first providing some context to who and what Pelagius was, which will explain why he infuriated Augustine so much. While many of the details on Pelagius's life are still a mystery, what we do know is that he was a Briton and perhaps a monk who traveled to Rome and preached against many of the luxuries he saw the Church participating in there. Pelagius's character is described as beyond reproach, and many of his colleagues, including his future opponent Augustine, described him as having a great reputation. Pelagius was a powerful preacher who insists always and everywhere on human responsibility for our own sins. His insistence on human responsibility for their own actions led him to live a balanced life as an ascetic. When he visited Rome from Britain, he was shocked by the luxury he saw many living in there, which he believed distracted from living a life in accordance with God. In fact, the political and moral corruption of the state, the scandalous behavior of Christian clergy, and the half-Christian, half-pagan practices of many ordinary Christians are well documented in Christian writers of the period. At the Art Institute of Chicago, viewers can see some of the physical evidence of the luxury some Romans lived in, particularly regarding the glass-blown and pearl-laden jewelry, makeup containers, and the busts of earlier Greek art. In Rome, buildings such as the Mausoleum of Santa Costanza also call back to the early Christian decadence of the day, with the wealth of many early Christians being put on display for the rest of Rome to see. Pelagius looked at these sorts of items and buildings and the world around him and believed they would be stumbling blocks to the human perfection he knew human beings could achieve if they put their whole spirit into it. While Pelagius's lifestyle seemed on all accounts to be the perfect ideal for a Christian, his theology ended up getting him into real trouble with the leading voices of early Christianity. Pelagius and Pelagianism, named after him, is best known to history for the belief that humans are designed for good and can use our own free will to act in the way Jesus calls us to. For Pelagius, free will is a vitally important part of his theology. Pelagius asks, what was the point of Jesus giving out commandments, as was recorded in the Gospels, if human beings were so full of sin that they could not choose to follow them? Contemporary scholars describe Pelagianism as an ascetic and reforming movement whose aim was to call Christians back to a life of gospel perfection. For these beliefs and questions, Augustine, the Bishop of Hippo, and Jerome, the author of the Vulgate, or the Latin translation of the Bible, opposed Pelagius and eventually had him labeled as a heretic. Despite what may sound like a positive theology, two monoliths of the early church, St. Augustine and St. Jerome, did not like Pelagius in the slightest. St. Augustine, also known as Augustine of Hippo, was the Bishop of Hippo, not surprisingly, in northern Africa, and is a foundational figure in early church history whose theology of original sin and God's salvific acts of grace informed not only much of the theology of the early church, but also inspired many of the reformers such as Martin Luther during the Reformation. Jerome, a contemporary of Augustine, was an ascetic Christian priest who primarily is known for translating the Bible into Latin, with his translation being known popularly as the Vulgate. Both Augustine and Jerome have less than flattering polemics against the threat they saw inherent in Pelagius' teachings. For Augustine, Pelagius' thoughts on the human ability to work towards perfection denied the power of God's grace, while for Jerome, he believed Pelagius was incorrect in his concept of the human ability for sinlessness. In his main work targeting Pelagius, Jerome can be seen claiming that the theory of sinlessness blasphemously creates equality between humanity and God. For Jerome, Pelagius' belief that humans can strive for perfection also disrespects both Jesus Christ and the apostles. It disrespects Jesus as he is truly the only one who can be without sin, and furthermore it disrespects the apostles, who although handpicked by Jesus to follow him were sinners. Jerome criticizes Pelagius for insinuating that any person could use their own free will to both outperform the apostles in holiness and put themselves on par with Jesus. Augustine's criticisms of Pelagius revolve much more on the issue of grace. Augustine believes that grace given by God is the only efficacious form of salvation, and that without God's grace, humans are forever destined to live in sin. In a popular story on Pelagius' initial confrontation with Augustinian thought, it is said that he read the phrase, "Give what you command and command what you will," from Augustine's Confessions, and thought it was a load of malarkey. Augustine believed wholeheartedly that all human beings are in fact deserving of punishment due to the sin of Adam. All are a mass of sin. This belief in the total depravity of humans and our inability to overcome it on our own is incompatible with Pelagius' notion of free will and human goodness. Augustine believed Pelagius' understanding of human goodness relegated God and Christ's role in saving us. While Augustine believed Christ's death redeemed us from our past sin inherited by Adam, Pelagius believed Christ's death undoes the effect of the long-ingrained habit of sin in two ways: by his teaching, revealing what the law of God is, and by his example, showing and inspiring Christians to live by it. Ali Bonner's book, The Myth of Pelagius, provides an excellent analysis of the Pelagian controversy and what logical steps Augustine and Jerome took to condemn Pelagius with heresy. Here is her description of the two main points of the controversy in her own words. First, an allegedly obligatory choice between two poles with effective human free will on the one hand and divine prevenient grace on the other, as each being respectively the sole cause of human virtue. The second, another purportedly binary choice, concerned the anthropology of Christianity, namely, whether human nature was inherently inclined to evil as a result of the transmission of original sin from Adam to the rest of humanity, or whether it was inclined to moral goodness as a result of man having been created in God's image, and was capable of both good and evil. The tenets were designed, and the myth of Pelagianism was created, in order to obscure the attempt to install as dogma particular choices between these alleged binary options. In addition to identifying with clarity the main points of contention between Augustine and Pelagius, Bonner also seeks to draw a distinction between the man Pelagius and the movement eventually named Pelagianism by the Church. Diving further into Augustine's criticisms of Pelagius, in his work on the deeds of Pelagius, Augustine specifically accuses Pelagius of 14 tenets, listed here. Through detailed comparisons of each of these claims with Pelagius' own surviving writings, Bonner argues that only the first argument of the ninth category, that God's grace is given in accordance with our own merits, accurately describes the true beliefs of Pelagius. Bonner's work gives us a clear picture of how Augustine sought to discredit Pelagius' conception of free will by associating him with a movement of Pelagianism, containing clearly heretical beliefs which were not true to Pelagius' own teachings. Augustine and Jerome would both put in a lot of work to eventually have the popular Pelagius condemned by both the reluctant pope and the all-too-eager emperor. The controversy is looked at as a low point in the history of Western theology, as bribery, political manipulation, and privilege were all involved in the mobilization of clergymen and politicians against Pelagius' thought. In order to craft Pelagius as a villain whose views were dangerous to the Church, both Church Fathers twisted his words and associated Pelagius with views not accurate to his own teachings. Even though Bonner's work is quite valuable in presenting the demonization of Pelagius by Augustine, even her views are still debated among scholars. In his review of Bonner's work, Lamberix takes issue with her exemption of Pelagius' most substantial work, the commentary on the Pauline epistles. Even among scholars today, the specifics of what can properly be attested to Pelagius is under debate and murky. This leads us into how modern readers of Pelagius understand or misunderstand the beliefs of our 5th century proponent of human free will. Despite being labeled a heretic by two of the traditional four Latin doctors of the Church, representations of Pelagius in the modern world have generally been quite positive. Somehow, in the last few decades, a heretic condemned by both Augustine and Jerome has come back into the limelight as a hero of modern liberal humanist Christian thought, far before it came to be. Much of the growing love for Pelagius stems from society's growing discomfort with Augustine and his own prioritization of free will. Academics such as Harvard professor Stephen Greenblatt has lauded Pelagius and his followers as moral optimists, and others, including Michael Axworthy, claimed Pelagius has had the last laugh in the liberal humanist culture of Western Europe today. Both of these writers believe Pelagius' doctrine of free will and the human ability to change has overcome Augustine's notions of total human depravity and original sin which dominated church thought for so long. Michael Axworthy believes modern Western thought is defined by its belief in free will, in the perfectibility of mankind, and the ability of people to make the right choices, do good, and to make things better. As Bonner points out, Pelagius himself was more of a balanced ascetic who tried very hard to argue that his beliefs were well within church orthodoxy. The two things that Pelagius were not willing to give up were an assertion of the goodness of human nature and effective free will. Although Pelagius himself would probably still find a lot of problems with modern society's consumerism, he would probably support the liberal humanism's movement toward a belief that every person can make choices in the direction of growth. On top of his appearances in modern academia, Pelagius has even managed to sneak into pop culture, appearing as a positive and loved friend and mentor of one no less than King Arthur in the 2004 film King Arthur. While the 2004 film certainly presents a less than positive view of the church, with cardinals being corrupt liars, believers burning people alive underground for the faith, and most of the heroes being virtuous pagans, the film's presentation of Pelagius is particularly positive. Here are the clips in which Pelagius is referenced.
Innocence, but you, Arthur, your path to God is through Pelagius. I saw his image in your own.
He took my father's place for me. His teachings on free will and equality have been a great influence. I look forward to our reunion in Rome.
Rome awaits your arrival with great anticipation.
In this scene, Pelagius is described in many ways as the progenitor for the modern freedoms which we know and support today about the human spirit. The film overall presents King Arthur as a figure who advocates for freedom and individual autonomy against the growing hierarchy and corruption of Rome. In this film, Pelagius is presented as a proponent of this Rome which never was, which celebrates human dignity and our right to free choice. Although not particularly accurate in any historical way, the film's presentation of Pelagius shows how modern society seeks to associate Pelagius with our own cherished values of free will and human growth. Again, much of the growing love for Pelagius seems to stem from our society's growing discomfort with Augustine and our own obsession with free will. Many contemporary churches disagree with the pessimistic anthropology of Augustine and find themselves asking the same question of, why would a benevolent God permit something so monstrous as original sin? Pelagius offers a welcome rebuke for modern readers trying to parcel out the problems of justice and mercy they see inherent in traditional orthodoxy. While Augustine stands as a reminder of human sin, Pelagius is the great patron of authenticity, diversity, and other postmodern gods. Even those who do not agree with Pelagius still find his teachings to be inherent in the world around them. An article in Christianity Today from U.S. Senator Joshua Hawley claimed that the modern world's philosophy of liberation from family and tradition, of escape from God and community, a philosophy of self-creation and unrestricted, unfettered free choice stems from Pelagius. This article draws primarily from Augustine's presentation of Pelagius, as it says, Pelagius believed individuals could achieve their own salvation, which we saw in Ali Bonner's book is not necessarily the case. Although this article also connects Pelagius with modern society, its image of Pelagius isn't fully accurate, as Hawley also says Pelagius was most popular with the old senatorial families of Rome, which was not true as he was an ascetic who criticized the wealthy saw in Rome. Similar to how Augustine demonized Pelagius' idea of choice, this article points out that problems in contemporary America are equated with Pelagius. Hawley says, a Pelagian society is one that celebrates the wealthy, prioritizes the powerful, rewards the privileged, and for too long now that has described modern America. On both sides of the aisle, Pelagius is being crafted into a figure representing modern society. Whether that means as he's a hero or a villain is up to the ones attempting to recreate this mysterious monk to fit whatever version of the present they believe in. Pelagius provides an interesting exploration into how a historical figure construed by his contemporaries as a heretical villain can be reconstructed from those very criticisms into a hero for the modern age. Both historical figures and modern values tend to attribute to him values which he may not even have believed in. Just as Augustine's presentation of Pelagius as hostile to all things orthodox in the church made him a villain in the eyes of himself and others, his same presentation as an impassioned enemy of orthodox values makes him a hero in the eyes of contemporary readers who disagree with Augustine. Neither side really does justice to the Briton monk who desired to maintain a role of both human goodness and divine grace in human salvation. The values and theological needs of each age determine much of who is esteemed in history. Pelagius is an example of how the changing values and theological needs of history encourage different views in the same man through the same writings. Even though we lack much of the information around Pelagius' life and theology, his role in the Pelagian controversy shaped the psyche of the Western Church for hundreds of years, And it might just be today we realize that we would have been on the wrong side of the orthodox debate. Thank you for listening, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.